Hi everyone, and welcome to our channel. If you've ever wondered how economists measure the size of an economy, you've likely heard the term GDP. But what exactly is GDP, and why does it matter? By the end of this video, you'll have a clear understanding of GDP, how it's calculated, and why it's important for understanding the health of a country's economy. Let's dive in. First off, what is GDP? GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product, and it represents the total monetary value of all goods and services produced within a country's borders over a specific time period. Essentially, GDP gives us a snapshot of a country's economic activity. Types of GDP. There are two main types of GDP that are important to understand: nominal GDP and real GDP. Nominal GDP is the value of goods and services produced in an economy using current prices. This means it doesn't account for inflation. Real GDP, on the other hand, adjusts for inflation, giving a more accurate picture of the economy's size over time. Real GDP is often used for comparing the economic growth of a country year over year. Let's understand with an example. In this diagram, we see that nominal GDP goes up every year because prices are rising, even if we are producing the same amount of goods. Real GDP stays the same because it removes the effect of price increases, showing the actual production level. So, nominal GDP shows growth with inflation, while real GDP gives a clearer picture by adjusting for inflation. How is GDP calculated? GDP is equal to C plus I plus G plus XM. There are three main methods to calculate GDP: the expenditure approach, the income approach, and the production approach. Let's focus on the expenditure approach, which is the most common. C stands for consumption, which includes all the spending by households on goods and services. I is for investment, such as business expenditures on equipment or construction of buildings. G stands for government spending, including everything from infrastructure projects to public services. Finally, XM represents net exports. X is exports, goods we sell to other countries, and M is imports, goods we buy from other countries. The difference between the two is added to the GDP. Why is GDP important? Now that we know how to calculate GDP, why does it matter? GDP is one of the most widely used indicators to gauge the health of an economy. When GDP is growing, it typically means businesses are producing more, people are earning more, and the country is becoming more prosperous. But if GDP is shrinking, it can signal economic troubles, like higher unemployment or decreased business investment. Limitations of GDP. While GDP is a useful tool, it's not perfect. There are several limitations to keep in mind. Environmental impact. GDP doesn't take into account the environmental costs of economic growth, such as pollution. Income inequality. A growing GDP doesn't always mean that everyone benefits. Sometimes, wealth becomes concentrated in the hands of a few. Non-market transactions. GDP doesn't measure unpaid work like volunteer work or household chores, even though these activities contribute to well-being. Underground economy. This image represents the black market and informal economy activities that GDP does not capture. Quality of life. This image shows that GDP does not measure the overall well-being or happiness of a population. Let's understand this within the context of India's GDP growth. As you can see, India's GDP has grown significantly from 1980 to 2020, with rapid expansion beginning around the year 2000. But if you look at the distribution of wealth among different income groups in India over the past 2 decades, top 10% share of income, this group's share of wealth has increased significantly over the years. Top 1% share of income, this group's share has also seen a notable rise. Bottom 50% share of income, the wealth share for this group has remained relatively stagnant, indicating little to no growth. The chart highlights the growing economic disparity, with the wealthiest segments of the population accumulating more wealth, while the bottom half sees minimal change. This data underscores the issue of wealth inequality in India. Another chart shows the income distribution for the year 2022 to 23. Top 10%, this group holds 57% of the total income, with an average income of 53 lakhs rupees per annum. Middle 40%, they hold 35% of the total income, averaging 13.5 lakhs rupees per annum. Bottom 50%, this group has only a 15% share of the total income, with an average income of 1.75 lakhs rupees per annum. This visual representation highlights the significant income disparity in India, with the top 10% earning substantially more than the middle and bottom segments of the population. Let's take a look at further real-world examples. To understand the diversity in economic size and wealth distribution across the globe. In 2023, the United States had a GDP of over $25 trillion, making it the largest economy in the world by total economic output. However, when we examine GDP per capita, or the average economic output per person, smaller nations like Luxembourg, Switzerland, and Norway consistently top the list. Luxembourg, for instance, boasts a GDP per capita of over $125,000, which indicates a wealthier population on average, despite its much smaller total GDP compared to global giants like the US or China. At the same time, countries like China, with a GDP of approximately $18 trillion, have a much lower GDP per capita, around $12,000, due to their vast population size. This shows that while China is the second largest economy globally, the average income of its citizens is much lower than in wealthier, smaller nations. On the other hand, India, another large economy with a GDP of nearly $3.5 trillion, has a GDP per capita of around $2,500, reflecting significant income disparity and room for growth. These differences between total GDP and GDP per capita illustrate how the size of an economy doesn't always equate to individual wealth or living standards. By examining these varying economic metrics, we get a clearer picture of global wealth distribution and economic power across different regions. Alternative indicators to GDP. While GDP is important, some economists argue that it shouldn't be the only measure of economic well-being. Alternatives like GNI, gross national income, and the Human Development Index, HDI, and also consider income distribution, Gini coefficient, and genuine progress indicator, GPI. So, to wrap up, GDP is a crucial tool for understanding the size and health of an economy, but it has its limitations. As we've seen, GDP can tell us a lot about a country's economic activity, but we also need to consider other factors when evaluating well-being and growth. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with any questions you have about GDP or other economic topics. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.